Good evening. So tonight we are going to change the colors. We are going to override the colors specified in CSS or inline styles with 10 different ways to do so. I've created these 10 H2 headings, as you can see on the right, and they are all black, either from CSS definitions or inline style specified right in the attribute. And let's jump right into it. So this blue color got here because we've applied a style later on with the same specificity as the initial declaration, but because it was later on defined below the first declaration, it gets the higher priority. Now I'm using H2 with the nth of type n, meaning all the H2s, and then I'm using rules with the individual numbers to show you how I'm doing it. So we get the same specificity of the selector, but it was defined later on, hence it's blue. Now this tomato color is defined before the rule, but with a higher specificity of the element using prepending another selector before it. Now I'm using body. So with body, it is stronger than just using H2 nth of type. Now the fourth example is just using important regardless of the position in the document, because it was not importanted in the initial declaration. So I'm using olive here on this line for the fourth H2 heading. Now the pink one gets its pinkness from using important overriding the initial important, because as you can see, I'm using the H2, the fifth H2 with color black important, and here with pale violet red important, just simply with using the important in both declarations, we now get to the same level of choosing which one's stronger, like it would not have important in the first place. So it's the same as the first example. We are just putting the important either later on in the document or with a stronger selector. Inline color. So the sixth heading, if I switch to the HTML part, the sixth heading now has style color black defined in the attribute. And for the sixth one, I am using important to beat the inline color, which is fine. And I'm using the condition statement, using only applying the style to the sixth heading if it has defined style attribute and if the style attribute contains the string color. So this works, for example, if you are using some third-party library that you have no control over, or some framework you are pulling from somewhere else, and only applying this important rule when there is inline style defined. This is much safer than just saying important in your document, because lesser you use important, the less mess you are getting out. Now the seventh is changing the inline color, which was defined here with layers. Now layers are quite new. All modern browsers support them. You can name them, and you can just keep them anonymous. You can use sublayers, and within them you can use them like media queries, and you can stack them, order them. You can do many different things, and one of them is changing the importance, and quite a good safe thing to do when incorporating other code styles is just wrap them in layers, so you can then play with the orders. Check the MDN documentation on layers. And the funky parts comes when there is inline styles with important, because those has the highest priority of all. You cannot beat them with important in CSS defined, regardless of how many elements or selectors you put before it. So we need to find some funky ways or creative ways to change it. So in my 8th example here, which is this one, I am simply using text shadow, which just is same as a box shadow, but it cuts the shadow in the exact places where of the symbols, or like a path of those. So if I jump now, I'm going to show you in DevTools in a second. So we are basically I'm using the pseudo class here on the 8th element to using after. This highlighted area is the place where the original text is located. So if I just disable it, unticking the content, you can see the black heading, and I am just hiding it with a blank pseudo element using div and the color of the background, and below that you can see the text from the text shadow defined here. So we just hit the original text and created its copy using text shadow and only displaying that if you have the option. Now granted, all these funky examples are for situations where you really cannot change the HTML, cannot change the important in the inline attribute, and cannot do nothing about it, and you need to find a hacky way to change the color, or do many different things you need to do, and you need to get creative. 9th example is quite similar. We are just using the pseudo element, and I'm using the content here with the same text as the original element and just positioning it over it with position absolute, and then I'm using so this is not correct. I should put this one there, and I'm using text shadow, which now it renders quite well. If you don't use the text shadow of the background of the original text, then you might get this distorted dots around the text, because it's applying the same text over it, like stacking them on the layers. So if you put a text shadow with the same color of the background of the original text, you can get a little bit more crispier results. So again, we are now hiding the original text and putting a pseudo element with the same text over it. Now you don't need to write it manually. You can get JavaScript to put it into the like a text content of the original elements, to put them into, let's say, data attribute, and then get the content using data. And 10th, the last one, is if you can't use anything else, you need to get creative and find a way to use a different rule to get the same result. So if I want to change the color of an element, and I cannot override the rule color, I can, in my example here, I am using filter, and I'm just changing stuff in filter, changing its attributes like brightness, saturation, hue, contrast, and inversion to the parameters I need to get to the result. Now you can do this manually, but there are two tools online that you feed in the desired color in hex format, and it will calculate the filter for you. So you can get this automated and change the color this way. Now the same thing if you have inline defined height of an element using important, you can use CSS and say using the max height rule. Or if you think about what you want to achieve, you can skip overriding the rule itself and use something else using CSS to get to the same result. So that's it.